He was wringing out a mop when she said it, like it was nothing, like it was everything. "Will you be my date to the party, Dad?" The words slipped into the echoing corridor, pooled on the tile like the pale ribbon of mop water, and he saw himself in them, a man in a green uniform with a face lined by sleep and soap and kept promises. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're reading from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. They met where they always did, in the service corridor that smelled of lemons and warm electricity. The Muramer Hotel had a public face of chandeliers and a private spine of cinderblock and cartwheels. Arturo Santos had learned both faces so well that when his daughter's heels clicked down the hall, he knew they didn't belong here, not with that kind of precision, that kind of price tag. Valentina stepped into the light from a buzzing fixture and swallowed. Her hair was pinned back so loosely, it looked deliberate. The dress was a whisper, the kind rich girls wore to parties with names like Gala and Legacy Ball, names that hovered just out of reach of a man who had to earn the right to wash their floors. "Hi," she said, and the word was small and complicated. "Hi," he echoed, and 100 memories pressed against his ribs, the first time she stood on his work boots to dance in their kitchen, the first time she brought him on a paper so neat he wanted to frame it, the first time she stopped calling him Pappy in public because her cheeks burned so hot they hurt. She nodded toward the mop like it was not the real thing between them. "Sorry to just show up, I texted, I know, but I wanted to see your face when I ask." Arturo wrung the mop slower. He had the kind of hands that remembered how to be gentle and strong at once. "Go on, Vale," she exhaled, eyelids fluttering. "There's a party tomorrow, the Caldwell Foundation's Legacy Gala." He blinked. He knew that name like you know the weather patterns that decide whether a paycheck stretches. Caldwell meant marble floors and sweepers that didn't hum but whispered over Persian rugs. Caldwell meant the man whose last name she wore like a dress she hadn't asked for. Nathaniel Caldwell. A name so polished it reflected everyone else in distortions. "What about it?" he asked, as if he didn't already feel the answer vibrating in his bones, as if he could still be surprised by her. "I want you to be my date," she said. "Not as a joke, not to make anyone angry, I promise, though that will probably happen. She pressed the fingertips of one hand against the hard, flat bone at the base of her throat. "I want to walk in with you, I want to be seen with you." The mop lever squealed, and Arturo flinched at the sound like crows in an orchard. "Vale. I know, it's ridiculous and last minute." She started to laugh and stopped. "I should have asked earlier, I kept practicing a calmer way and it kept sounding like I wanted to show you off like a tool. She lifted her chin. "I want to stand next to you in a room where they pretend men like you don't exist." Arturo opened his mouth to say something fatherly, something that would carry the weight of all the nights he had slept on vinyl chairs because there were 2 shifts and only 1 bus. He looked down at himself, the green polo with the Muramer logo. The name tag, Arturo, below which someone had drawn a smiley face with a permanent marker and underlined it. The pants shiny at the knees, his shoes that had been mended more times than he had told her. "You have a date," he said, because he needed to test the air to see if it would hold the weight of what she was asking. "I canceled," she said, and there was a streak of rebellion in it. "And I told Nathaniel," she stopped herself. "Nathaniel, never Dad, not for her. I told him I wanted to invite you instead." "What did he say?" She smiled a little, and it wasn't nice. "That it would be a spectacle, that charity is about discretion, that he doesn't want the evening derailed by theatrics." Her voice softened. "I told him that his entire life is theatrics." Arturo could hear the scrape of the cart rolling 2 corridors over, the murmur of the clerk at the staff desk. The world went on, even when his heart paused to think. He lifted his eyes back to hers, the same dark brown, the same stubborn light. "You know what rooms like that are like," he said gently. "You remember." "I remember," she said, and he could see it flash across her face, the first time she stood on marble and felt it push back through thin soles, the first time someone called her mother a survivor and her father an absence, a choice to be corrected. She had eaten shrimp and swallowed words that tasted like pennies. "I'm not a man who wears a tux," he said. "Then don't," she replied, too quick, like she'd planned that answer. "Be you." Something warmed and ached at once behind his ribs. "That's not what they want. It's what I want." He put the mop into the bucket and let it lean there like a confession. He studied her face, the way her lipstick had smudged where she'd been biting it. Why this? Why now? She looked past him down the corridor, to the door that opened onto the glamorous half of the building, to where silk met glass and music ever so politely pretended not to be silk and glass. Because I made a promise to myself when I graduated that I would stop disappearing you. And because Nathaniel told me I should finalize the guest list with Julian. Julian, Arturo said, rolling the name like something in a pan you check for heat. The fiancé. She made a sound that wasn't yes. They pushed, he fit. It felt like winning a prize I didn't remember entering for. She looked at him. I haven't always been brave. I've let them hand me boxes and tell me what I look like in them. Then last week, I passed you in the lobby and you looked through me. I don't blame you. I was in a dress like a signal flare and heels you could use to hammer nails. But you still looked through me, and I felt like I was drowning in carpet. Arturo's fingers curled and uncurled around the mop handle. He remembered that day. The shift where he kept his head down so long he forgot it could rise. Come with me, she said, please. He nodded before he knew he'd nodded, like an old dancer who still knows the music in his bones. Okay, he said, then added with the stubbornness that had never left him, on one condition. Anything? I go as me, not in a rented suit that pretends I forgot how to be myself. Not in borrowed respect, as your father. As the man who cleans the floors of your world, not the one they put into shoes that pinch just to say they were civil. She went still for a heartbeat. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't blink them back, didn't weaponize them. She let them be what they were. Okay, she whispered. As you. He reached into the bucket, lifted the mop, and watched the water run down the length of it like a minute passing. Then it's a date. She laughed and sobbed in the same breath and rushed forward. He smelled her perfume, a kind of citrus heat, and beneath it, the clean scent of her childhood soap. He had bought it in bulk at the dollar store on days when bulk meant he could afford one more bottle of milk. You'll regret it, she said into his shoulder, voice thick. Maybe, he said, but we'll regret it together. Arturo had never been allowed to own the rooms that had raised him, rooms with ceilings that sweated in summer and radiators that rattled like bones in winter. The Miramar wasn't his either. It was a place where he got to make other people's nights possible. He had once been other kinds of man. He had worked the line in a factory that made fans that turned stale heat into something a body could stand. He had sold tools at a hardware store whose manager wore shirts so white they made Arturo want to wash his hands twice. He had lifted crates at a warehouse until his back spoke to him with a voice that didn't soften. When he was young, he danced for almost a year with a woman who taught him how to feel the time in someone else. That woman became a wife whose hunger for a different life lived with them like a third person. That hunger wore the world down. Nathaniel's eyes had been quiet and ruthless. The ring had dazzled. The money had filled holes they had dug with love. By the time Valentina was 14, the divorce papers were signed, the apartments were measured, and Judge Larson told everyone what he could live with. He thought he knew what that meant. He learned with time that it meant he would always be a man 2 doors away, welcome and unnecessary at once. He kept most of that to himself. He learned the names of every concierge, learned the magic trick of making a stain become a story about how it was never there. He moved through the Miramar the way a person who really needs the income learns to move, fast enough to satisfy, slow enough not to break. Valentina learned a different geography. Her world turned on names she memorized like Spells, Wellesley, Verso, Cala, Dior. The first time she realized the gold card she handed over had her stepfather's name embossed in iron letters under hers, she thought she felt the weight of it in her wallet even when it wasn't there. By then, she had learned not to cry in bathrooms that echoed. She called Arturo on Tuesdays, came by at Christmas. Left the street before the car waited too long with the hazard lights blinking, a hazard in more ways than one. He said nothing when she forgot to answer his texts for 10 days. He said nothing when she called him from a rooftop, wind eating her voice, to say she was wearing a dress that made her look like someone else. He collected each silence like a receipt he kept in a shoebox under the bed. When she asked him to the gala, it felt like the shoebox had been tipped out onto the floor. He bent down and picked up each one, thinking which of them would matter now. At Sal's barbershop that night, Sal raised both hands when Arturo said no to the loan of a suit. "You're gonna meet Mr. C and all those salad forks in a janitor uniform?" Sal asked, scissors stilled midair. "I'm going to meet my daughter's eyes," Arturo said. "Everything else is furniture." Sal stared at him for a beat, then set to work trimming the hair close to his head like he was cleaning a frame, not cutting it. Valentina sat on Arturo's couch later, a couch that had been rescued from the curb and tenderly rehabilitated with a screwdriver and a vision. She watched the news on a tiny screen. They were already rehearsing the gala's opening in the mirroring monitor voices of people who liked how they sounded when pretending to care. "Julian's going to be there," she said. "What would you like me to do if he speaks to me?" Arturo asked, mouth curving. "Not what I want to do," she said, and the laugh that escaped them both was the closest they had been in months. He asked about her work. She told him about projects she couldn't name, about teams she had assembled and people who took their credit back like a dog takes a stick, fierce, grateful, unwilling to be let go of. He asked about Nathaniel. She told him what you tell someone who already knows, selection of men always thinking they were kings, even when the crown was borrowed from the taxes they never paid. She asked him about his friend Bernal. He shook his head and said, "Not a story for tonight." "What happened?" "Tomorrow," he said, "when you have no glitter in your hair." "I'm scared," she said, too quiet then. "What if I want to do this for the wrong reasons? What if I want them to see me doing this more than I want you next to me? What if tomorrow I wish I'd worn a different dress, and I make you stand in the corner because you don't match the color of my shame?" He leaned back and looked at her the way he did when she was small and asked if clouds were heavy. "Then tomorrow, if it happens, you will say to me, 'Pappy, I forgot the truth,' and I will say I am right here, and we will start again on the first block and we will walk until you remember." She cried in clean, quick arcs and wiped her face with the back of her hand like a kid. He wanted to tell her about the letter he never sent her, the one he wrote the weekend she moved into the Caldwell house, where he promised to be the man who kept the light on, no matter how far out of the city she went. But he didn't. Tomorrow had to be enough. The Miramar polished itself for the gala. They brought in extra staff and wheeled in towers of flowers that smelled like they had cost as much as somebody's rent. The ballroom's chandeliers were lowered for cleaning and raised again. The dance floor was buffed and waxed until it looked like you could fall through it into another world. Arturo worked his afternoon shift with an urgency that came from wanting to be finished before he had to become some new kind of visible. He tucked his phone into his shirt pocket when he went to clock out. The time card stamped a sound that clicked in his bones. Valentina met him outside the staff entrance. She stood in the shade with the kinds of sunglasses that mostly functioned as a warning sign. Her dress was black, simple, with a cut that made the air around her look more expensive. At her throat, a necklace of diamonds in the shape of droplets at the very second they fall. "You look nice," Arturo said, and meant it, and also meant you look like someone they will want to own. "So do you." Her gaze traveled down and then back up. She didn't flinch at the uniform. She did something better. She smiled like his skin was a celebration. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she threaded her arm through his. "Let's go anyway." They cut across the service lot and around the fountain that sprayed water high enough to pretend it could wash off a lifetime. At the double doors, a woman with a clipboard stood guard. She was the kind of woman who could sell you a smile and mean it if you did what she wanted. "Name?" she asked, and looked at Arturo as if the question was truly for him, and that was the first kindness of the night. "Valentina Caldwell," Vale said. The name cut the room open. Heads turned the way a field does when the wind changes. Whispers traveled. She felt Arturo's arm stiffen against hers and patted it. The clipboard woman checked, lips pressed tight. "Of course." "And you're," she trailed off, eyes flicking to Arturo's green polo to his name tag. +1. "Arturo Santos," Valentina said, and put her chin up like the earth had tilted and she was still here. "Of course," the woman repeated and underlined something on her sheet. "Enjoy." Music swelled from within, strings humid with money. The air cooled the second they crossed the threshold. It was like stepping onto a film set where everyone knew their lines except the two of them. People glanced, some looked away, a few smiled, those who had practice at it under any circumstance. The chandelier overhead trembled with light. The carpet accepted the weight of Arturo's shoes as if surprised by it. He could feel every seam, every stitch. Nathaniel Caldwell appeared as if conjured, like someone had pressed a button and he had glided out. He was all angles smoothed, in a tuxedo that looked like it had achieved some private peace. He reached Vale first and kissed the air near her cheek, then turned to Arturo with a smile like a painted spoon. "Arturo," he said, "I'm glad you could join us. Bold choice." His eyes flicked across the uniform. "Very authentic," Arturo nodded. Authentic was what people called you when they wanted to decide whether you belonged in a picture of the truth. "Thank you for inviting me," he said, and was proud his voice didn't shake. "It took some advocating," Nathaniel murmured, then turned to greet the mayor. Julian sidled over, carrying a drink designed to look like a gemstone. He wore a tux like a man between floors in an elevator, acquainted with the passing view, impatient for the next thing he would own. "V," he said, and slid a hand to the back of her arm, undeterred by her slight step away. "Mr. Santos." His tone was bright, the way some people made a tone bright when they wanted to make you squint. "Big night." "Big," Vale said, and snapped her arm free of his touch with a sweetness that was a warning. Servers moved through the room in black like swifts at dusk, eyes level, hands trained to never ask questions. The board members stood in a cluster near a dais. The Caldwell Foundation's branding dripped elegantly across the walls: legacy, community, commitment. The words sat there, polished and heavy. A woman approached them with an expression like she was about to step lightly on something delicate. "Valentina," she said, "what a surprise." The word was cut with sugar and salt. "And this is—" "My father," Vale said, and put her hand on Arturo's shoulder in a way that made the room's worst cathedrals tremble. "Arturo Santos, he works right here, he's worked here for years." The woman blinked. "Oh," she said, "well, it must be nice to switch sides for an evening." She laughed a little, waiting to be told she was clever. Arturo thought of mops, of how they cleaned in circles, how the circles took you over the same patch until it gleamed and you could see your face grimly in it. "I didn't know sides had doors," he said mildly. "I just came to dance with my daughter." Vale looked at him then, and it was the look of someone who has been parched and has just tasted water. For a second the noise fell away, and there were just the two of them, the oddest people in the room, identical in what mattered. They took seats near the back in chairs upholstered to suggest a life without splinters. The program lay folded with a bow at each place setting, artful menus like poems. Vale sat and tucked her legs to one side. Arturo's knee bounced before he stilled it. He thought of Bernal again. He thought of unions and men who had been told they were a family until the floor swallowed one and the others were handed mop heads to wipe up the story so it looked neat. A woman in black glided past with a tray of champagne. Arturo shook his head no. Vale took one and then set it back down, touched it like a talisman. Speeches began, the mayor, Nathaniel, a board member with a smile that had learned not to falter. They talked about impact and reach. About the children who had been helped by scholarships, the women saved from something by money that glowed softly under a flagship name. The applause was polite in a way that had a price. Nathaniel cleared his throat and leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping into a register people associate with credibility. "Friends," he said, "tonight is a celebration of legacy, of where we come from and where we are going." He smiled at the room like he loved them and their money with the same wistful respect. Legacy is not just about names, it is about bold choices. He let the pause bloom. "My daughter Valentina has made a bold choice tonight." Laughter rippled obediently. "She has chosen to bring someone very special. A man whose hard work and quiet dignity exemplify the values we celebrate." Arturo heard something inside him harden and ring like a bell when struck. He recognized the lead-up. He was about to be thanked and used all at once. "I'd like to invite them both to the stage," Nathaniel said, spreading his hands the way a saint accepts responsibility for saving you from yourself. Vale squeezed Arturo's hand under the table as if to say, "You can say no." He stood anyway. He had promised himself he would stand for her. Then he felt how the room looked at him as he walked with his daughter down the aisle between round tables. Curiosity, hunger, amusement, anger in a few faces. Memory in some, the kind that made them adjust their chairs slightly like old boats in a shifting tide. On the stage, the lights made the rest of the room a darker sea. Nathaniel stood at the microphone and smiled in a way that offered them all up. "Valentina," he said warmly, "introduce us to your guest." "My father," she said, and her voice was steady as a river. She took the mic, her hand brushing Nathaniel's for a second, and Arturo saw the flinch she tried to hide. "Arturo Santos." "Mr. Santos," Nathaniel said smoothly, raising his own microphone. "Would you care to say a few words? If not, it's fine. We know men like you are private." A few people tittered. Someone coughed. Arturo felt Vale's arm brush his. He could refuse. He could take the small out that Nathaniel had handed him like a bone. He could leave the room believing it had been the brave thing to walk in. Bernal's laugh came back to him like a sound upstairs, the way his friend, a man with a beard thick enough to hide secrets in, had said, "They don't know how many stories we are manager of, Hermano." And then the boiler. The report, the corner where it said, "Maintenance deferred, cost-benefit analysis complete," the settlement, the silence. The way Bernal's wife had pressed her lips together until they were white. Arturo reached for the microphone. He could feel the oil of 1,000 other hands on it, and he let it be. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," he said into the hush. "Thank you for your respect. I'm not good with speeches." "Yes, yes," Nathaniel murmured, pivoting to flank him with a smile that wanted to shepherd him away gently before he could become a lesson. Archero turned slightly to face the room. He saw the servers gird the walls like a thin fence. He saw staff by the door willing their faces to stay smooth. He saw Julian with his jaw set. The diamonds at Vale's throat looked like raindrops caught by a hand refusing to let the storm pass. "I'm a janitor," he said. "A lot of you don't see me when I'm doing my job right. That's okay. My job is to make your evening feel like it appeared by itself. It doesn't." A murmur. He pressed on. "I've worked at the Miramar long enough to know which carpets we flip when someone spills the expensive thing, which lamps flicker when it's hot and the air conditioning lies. I know it takes 6 of the small bottles of stain remover to get red wine out of white napery if you use a trick. Bernal taught me." "Bernal is my friend, was my friend." He swallowed. The lights were hot. He was sweating and he did not care. He looked at Vale. She nodded, tiny, as if it was a prayer he was completing. "The Caldwell Foundation paid for the new pediatric wing at St. Jude's," he said. "Good, I'm glad. The children deserve rooms where the machines work. Do you know what else is paid for?" "The non-repairs in the staff wing when the boiler started to sing. The calculations that said it was cheaper to ask us to listen for it than to fix it. The settlement when it exploded in October 3 years ago, and Bernal took the song into his chest." Silence knifed through the room so hard it squealed. "Security," Nathaniel said softly. A hand rose in the back of the room. Vale stepped forward. "Don't," she told the air. She took the second microphone from its stand and her hand didn't shake. "Let him finish." Nathaniel dragged a laugh out of himself. "We all love a good story," he said, "but tonight is about celebration. It's not about grievances." "Legacy," Archero said. "We're talking about legacy, so let's talk." He pointed, a small, unshowy gesture. "In my pocket are copies of the reports we filed. The ones that went to managers who hired companies with names that look like the initials of the same men vice-chairing boards like this. My friend Jose got a bonus if he didn't sign. My friend Ruth got her hours cut after she made too much noise. I kept cleaning floors. That's what we're told we're there to do." He faced the room fully. "But tonight, my daughter invited me as her date, and you do not ask a man to dance and then say he cannot choose the step." Someone in the back said, "Sit down," but it was muffled like a sound in a dream. "I'm not here to ruin a party," Archero said. "I'm here to tell you that where you stand is held up by people you've never thanked, and some of those people have fallen. We put on the shoes. We quiet the room. Legacy is everything you don't list on the brochure. If you will not pay the living now for what they hold up, you will pay the ghosts later." The word ghosts landed like a stone dropped into a pond. Ripples reached places he didn't expect. A server bowed her head. Someone took a sharp breath. Nathaniel was still smiling. The smile looked like it could cut him. "Archero," he said in a tone that was careful now, as if sidestepping a glass on the floor. "I appreciate your passion. Mistakes are always unfortunate. We correct what we can, but this is hardly." Vale's voice cut across him clean. "I'm not marrying Julian." Every head turned. Julian's eyebrows jerked up. "I'm sorry," Vale said, and didn't look sorry. "I'm not marrying Julian. I'm not keeping your name." She unclasped the diamonds with fingers that found the seam quickly, because she had practiced in front of her bathroom mirror first and placed them on the podium like a small animal set free. "I'm not taking this money that comes soaked in people whose names you never say." Julian laughed a single notch too high. Be serious." "I've never been more serious," she said calmly. "The scholarship that got me to college had the Caldwell name. Tonight I'm telling you, the man who raised me lifted floors for people who wouldn't look at him. The first time I went to a legacy party, I was 13. I ate fewer shrimp than I wanted because I thought someone would count, and I pretended my real father was in a car crash because it sounded less ugly to the women at the table." She turned to the room at large, and now the light made a halo around the edge of her hair. "I know some of you," she said. "I like some of you." It came out with a gentleness that wasn't an apology. "You've invited me onto boards and into panel photos, and I made my way through it because I thought if I was perfect enough, I could smuggle the people who made me through the back door. I was wrong. There's no back door. There's just a room and the people you allow to exist in it, and tonight," she reached for her father's hand. "Tonight, I'm not pretending." Security took a step forward, then another. Vale squeezed her father's hand. He let his shoulders loosen. If they were going to drag him out, he had said what he needed. "Mr. Caldwell," the mayor said from his table through a rictus smile, wanting to keep control of the picture. Shall we move this along? We shall, Nathaniel said. He raised his hands, an actor with the wrong script. Ladies and gentlemen, a brief intermission. Do refresh your drinks, we'll be back. The chandeliers vibrated with the applause he conjured, light that felt like ice clinking. The music stumbled in, then steadied. Servers moved, people spoke. Vale and Archero stood on stage, then stepped off because a stage is only a story as long as someone calls it one. At the edge of the room, a woman in a black dress with shoulders like a blade touched Archero's elbow. Sir, she said, if you'll come with me. You're firing me, Archero said, wasn't a question. No, she said, a little too quickly. We're asking you to exit, for now. Vale stepped between them. He'll exit when I do. Miss Caldwell, the woman said, but the name softened, slid, seemed to slough off like a skin. We're going, Vale said. She held out her hand. Archero took it. Sometimes leaving is still a ceremony. People watched and whispered and chose their sides. He saw some faces that were quietly glad. Other faces looked like clenched fists. They reached the doors, and the night met them with air that didn't smell like rented flowers. The city's noise welcomed and forgave them. The fountain continued to perform, ignorant and beautiful. People are going to call you names, Archero said. They've been calling me names for years, she said, and laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that had oxygen thin as dawn. I might get fired, Archero said. I might get disowned, she said then, softer. I already have a few times. Bernal, she asked, because the name had been sitting between them like a chair no one would sit in. He exhaled deeply. They said it was his mistake. It wasn't. He's dead. We were the only ones who showed up for the meeting when they told us it would never happen again. They gave us pizza. That's what it tasted like once. What do we do now? He thought about dancing on newspaper squares in their old kitchen, the way she'd tripped on her own enthusiasm, and he'd lifted her feet up onto his to steer her around the room, their shadows tall and ridiculous on the wall. We eat something greasy and cheap, he said. We make a plan tomorrow. Tonight we remind ourselves we are two people. Not a name, not a room. They ate in a diner with vinyl seats that side when you sat down, the way a room does when it is relieved to be ordinary. Vale took off her shoes and rubbed the ball of her foot with a sigh that fell out of her like a confession. Do you think it's ruined? She said. What? The part of me that can enjoy a party. He sipped his coffee. It was the kind that didn't pretend to be anything else. If it's ruined, we can build a different kind, he said. Invite different people. Hang ugly lights. Put up a sign at the door that says, you are allowed to spill here. She breathed out, and for a minute her shoulders fell back into the shape they had when she was 10 and had not yet learned the posture of women who are always trying to take up precisely the right amount of space. His phone buzzed. A message from Sal. You're on TV, Hermano. Sal added a face emoji that looked somewhere between scared and proud. Another vibration. A message from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Santos. I'm Ruth. I work nights. I saw. They can't fire you. We won't let them. You're not alone. He showed Vale. She bit her lip. Do you want me to go back tomorrow? She asked. Face Nathaniel. Read him the book of every name he forgets. Tomorrow, he said. We'll decide tomorrow. They paid. The waitress, whose name was stitched to her blouse as Dottie slipped them a slice of pie as if she was smuggling an exit visa. For bravery, she said, we don't get medals, we get pie. Outside, the sky had the look of a bruise that is going to bloom bigger before it decides to heal. Vale leaned into him for a second the way she had when she was small and a dog barked too loudly down the street. I have something to tell you, she said. 2 things. Okay, he said, because that was the only answer that ever mattered. First, Julian, he's not just a bozo in a nice tux. She swallowed. He grabbed my wrist too hard last month. He left a mark. I told Nathaniel. He said it was the pressure of commitment and that people who make fortunes sometimes grip too tightly. Archero felt something go cold and bright and accurate behind his eyes. I'm going to say a thing, he said, and the thing is, if I see him, I will. He pinched the bridge of his nose. I will choose to be more useful than angry. She laughed, breath hitching. The second thing, Nathaniel told me this morning that he was going to make an announcement at the gala, that he was naming a wing of the foundation after me, that his press team had already written the blurb. It talked about my courage. She closed her eyes. I couldn't do it, Dad. I couldn't stand there and be named after a check he wrote to draw a curtain over an ocean. You did the right thing, he said. She looked at him, searching. Do you know why I asked you to be my date? Because you wanted to show them they can't measure you with glass. Because I remembered the newspaper, she said. He looked at her, caught off balance. You used to put the newspaper on the kitchen floor so I wouldn't slip. You traced squares. You said, put your feet here. You said we will both look ridiculous and it will be the best we look all day. She smiled, a memory brushing through her like wind through laundry. I'm tired of not looking ridiculous. I want to look exactly like the person who loves me best. He could not speak for a heartbeat. When he found his voice, it had the grain of wood. Okay, he said again. Okay. He walked her to his apartment building because her driver could wait outside anywhere, and this, here, was a place where they were both recognized without name tags. He opened the door with his shoulder the way he always did, and the smell of old cooking and lemon cleaner met them like family. In his small kitchen, he put the pie on a plate that had a chip in the edge he always avoided with his thumb. He poured milk into 2 glasses. The light was too yellow. He did not adjust it. He wanted it to be what it was. She ate, and when she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, he wanted to weep for every time she had learned not to. The television on his counter hummed with news. The gala flickered there, pixelated. The anchor smiled with polite curiosity, then sharpened when the camera cut to Archero onstage. He looked like a man caught in someone's machine. Then he looked like himself. Tomorrow, he said, because promises are rooms you make together. We start a thing. If I get fired, we sue. If I don't, we organize. If we lose, we begin again. I'll help, she said, and this time it wasn't a declaration, it was a covenant. You might need to sell something, he said, trying to make a joke. She lifted her wrist. The bracelet she'd forgotten to return winked. She unlatched it and set it next to the pie. I already did, she said. At dawn, the Miramar looked like a set after the actors have gone, waiting for the next plot to be built on its bones. Archero dressed in the same uniform. Early mornings had always been his refuge, the time the world didn't ask much except for him to show up. At 7, the staff meeting was called. The hotel manager, a woman with a face carved into an approximation of neutrality, cleared her throat and found a line she could stand on. We've received inquiries, she said, meaning the phones have been singing and not all of it is praise. We don't discuss private HR matters in public. Mr. Santos, could I see you in my office? Ruth met him with a look that said, we're here. In the office, the manager didn't sit. I'm under pressure, she said. People are unhappy. They're unhappy you spoke. They're unhappy you are still on payroll. They're unhappy I'm not unhappy enough. I admire your, she searched for a word she could keep later. Courage, this place is more complicated than a party. I have decisions. I understand, he said. He did. Do you? She asked. Because this could go very badly, not just for you, for people who can't survive a week without a paycheck. She ran a hand along the edge of the desk. I'm not firing you today. He could have cried from the exhaustion of this kind of reprieve. Okay, but there is a condition, she said. You will not speak about what you said in any public forum while on the clock. You will not solicit. You will not organize. He heard the word condition again like a bell tolling the hour. He saw Vale's face last night, no diamonds. He saw Bernal's wife with an envelope she had to turn over 3 times before she could bear to open it. He saw Sal's text, Ruth's eyes. He saw his own reflection in the mop water, and he did not look like a man who had been told to be small. No, he said quietly. She blinked. No, he folded his hands, not to pray but to be steady. I will not agree. I will do my work. I will do it the way I always have, with pride. I will not stop talking, not now. Her mouth opened. There were a dozen things she might say if she wanted to punish him. She chose a different corner. Why? You could keep your job. You could keep your head down and do this softly around the edges. Why choose the hard thing? He thought for a second. The shocking decision did not feel like a shock inside his body. It felt like a door opening in whether he already lived in. Because my daughter asked me to be her date, he said simply. She asked me to walk into a room where I was the kind of man who makes nights possible and be the kind of man who says what is true. I can't be both and only on the days it is convenient. She stared at him, and he saw the woman she had been before she learned how to hold a company together with a tone. I can't protect you, she said. I didn't ask you to, he said, but you could be the kind of person who doesn't make this worse. A long moment stretched like taffy, thin, sweet, dangerous. At last she nodded. It was a tiny nod, the kind that could be taken back, but it was the beginning of something. Get back to work, Mr. Santos, she said. Please keep your nose as clean as those floors you love. He went back into the hall and found Ruth waiting. Well, I told them I wouldn't be quiet, he said. Good, she said. How's your daughter? Good, he said and laughed. Brave, a little reckless, my child. By late afternoon, the news had shifted from the gala to a city council scandal, and then back again, because people love stories where money and conscience have to share an armrest. Vale came by with sandwiches and papers. They sat in the break room under the bulletin board and assembled a list of names. Sal came. So did Jose, with a bruise like a map of a different season fading along his jaw. The night housekeeper arrived, and the linen manager and a concierge who wore their quiet like armor. They made a plan. It smelled like coffee and floor polish and ink. It sounded like people learning how to breathe in the same room. The Caldwell Foundation issued a statement that said almost nothing in many words. Unfortunate. Out of context. No place for grandstanding. The board members texted each other messages that would read badly if published. Nathaniel called Vale. She let it go to voicemail. He sent a text, "You have disappointed me." She spent a minute deliberately not deleting it because she wanted to be able to look at it and see exactly which thing had died and how. Julian posted a picture of himself laughing with 3 other men whose watch faces cost more than Archero's rent. He captioned it, "Onward." The comments were polarized. That word read differently when written across a grin. They rented the Union Hall on a Tuesday because it was cheaper. They swept it themselves. Archero taught Vale how to pick up the dust that avoids being seen. They strung lights so ugly they were beautiful, and they set up tables for food that didn't ask you to know which fork apologized for which course. They called it a meeting because that's what it was. But people showed the way you show to a party when the host says, "Bring nothing but yourself," and you believe them. Archero stood at the door and shook hands until his wrist hurt. He looked into faces and knew the names. The dishwasher who never spoke above a murmur but whose joke would cut a knife. The valet who ran faster than the elevator. The sous chef who sent staff home with leftovers more generous than regulations allowed. Dottie from the diner who walked in with an apple pie like a flag. Vale made a sign in her neat handwriting and stuck it up with tape. It said, "You are allowed to spill here." People laughed and nodded like permission had been given for something they did not know they had been waiting to be told. Ruth stood up and told a story about her mother deciding, at 48, that she would never again apologize for the shape of her hands. Jose told the room how long it takes for a bruise to fade when the bruise was made by a system, not a fist. Sal told them a story about suits and the men who wore them, and how the fabric has to be cut in a particular way if you want it to look like it wasn't trying to be something else. Archero didn't speak. He didn't need to. He moved through the room and refilled cups and took children's coats and tied a loose balloon string to a chair. When people came up and thanked him like he had laid down a road, he shook his head. "My daughter made me brave," he said. "I came with the mop." As the night wore out its first energy and settled into the second, someone found a speaker with enough power to make a corner of the hall into a dance floor. Music that no board member had paid for filled the room. Vale tugged Archero onto the square of wooden planks, and he protested because protesting is part of the ceremony, and then she put her feet on his shoes and they moved in a slow circle that had nothing to do with choreographers. "Look ridiculous with me," she murmured. "Always," he said, "because some vows are the easiest kind to keep." People gathered. Applause wasn't the point. Presence was. There were no photographers, there were phones, sure, but the stories would be told later by people in kitchens and on buses and at small tables in break rooms where laughter sometimes had to roughhouse with grief. At some point, the night turned into something that had a hinge, a slowness, a settling. They sat. They ate Dottie's pie, they put their names on lists, they agreed on times to show up and stand together. It was how change is always born under the fluorescent lights of places you don't see on postcards. When the hall had emptied and the long tables looked like they had never held anything at all, Archero pulled the tape off the "You are allowed to spill here" sign and folded it, cloth-like, into his jacket pocket. "Take me somewhere," Vale said. He led her up 10 flights of stairs to the roof of his building. The sky was a dark sheet stitched by plane lights. The city hummed. On one side, the Miramar sign glowed, unapologetic. "We're going to be tired for a while," he said. "Good," she said. "I've been tired from worse." He put his arm around her. The wind lifted a piece of his hair and laid it back down without asking. "Pappy," she said, and the word fell into the space between them like a stone, like a key turning in an old lock. "I'm glad you wore your uniform." "I wanted there to be no mistake," he said, so no one would say later I had been invented for the speech. She smiled. "You know what will be the first rumor, right?" "What?" "That the gala was faked, that we hired actors, that the janitor was a PR move," he laughed. "Then we'll tell them there are better actors than me washing your plates on Sundays." He felt a pressure in his chest that wasn't pain, it was the ache of having done something the body is not used to, like the day after a person who never runs decides to run. "You never told me how to forgive," she said, like she'd been waiting to ask. He thought, The wind made the metal of the railing vibrate at a pitch too high to hear, but he felt it in his teeth. "I don't know," he said, "but I think it starts when you are willing to lose a room and pick a different one, and when you stop asking people to be the thing you made them in your head." They stood there until the sky became a softer bruise and then a bloom. When the sun pushed a finger over the horizon, the city took a breath and started its trick again. There are always aftermaths. Some are loud and immediate, others make a home in your days and rearrange your furniture one chair at a time. The Caldwell board voted to review. A journalist with a careful smile and good instincts called Vale and asked to speak on background. 2 servers lost hours that week, 3 were given shifts that were kinder. The hotel manager sent Archero a memo that said nothing and implied something complicated. Nathaniel wrote Vale a letter that arrived in an envelope too heavy for the contents. It was a masterpiece of disappointment. She slid it open and read the first line, "You had every opportunity," then put it back into the envelope and slid it under the leg of a table that wobbled. Julian posted a picture of a yacht weeping money into an ocean he would claim to care about in a decade. Vale blocked him and then laughed at herself for having not done it sooner. Archero woke each day and went to work. He did his job and he did the other job now, the one with no name and all the work. He met with men in shirts that didn't fit them on the shoulders and women with eyes that had started to stop apologizing. He listened to stories. He told his. He left out nothing and added nothing. He learned to write his name slowly in forms that mattered. Vale moved out of the Caldwell apartment and into a place with a door that stuck in winter but opened when you asked it sweetly. At first, the quiet scared her. Then she began to hear a kind of music in it. She started a program at a nonprofit, not Caldwell-funded, that taught teenagers how to read the contracts that were poised to swallow them. She wore the same black dress to 3 different fundraisers and stopped caring who noticed. Every Thursday, she came to the Union Hall. She brought donuts on the days when the room had to forgive itself. She cleaned the coffee maker with the kind of attention you give to something that has offered you a place to stand. She and Archero developed a system with looks and half smiles. It was not a secret code. It was a language they had learned before they had words for it. On a Sunday in May, Archero's chest buzzed with a tightness he had never felt before. He sat on the edge of his bed and breathed through it 2 times 3. It eased. He told no one. He told himself he preferred to keep the proof quiet, the way a magician doesn't reveal the exact moment when the dove is put in his sleeve. On Tuesday, it returned. Vale was there. He sat down on a folding chair at the hall and rubbed his palm against the ridge of his pants seam. She saw it. She always did. "Hospital," she said. "I'll wait," he said. "Hospital," she said, and it was that tone. "Remember, this is our first promise. Remember, you said we would start again if we forgot." He went. The tests were a list he couldn't turn into a narrative. The doctor talked about stress and a heart that had been a good soldier and now wanted different orders. "You need to slow down," the doctor said. "You need to give it love like it's a person and patience like it's an old machine." He nodded. A plan grew whether he wanted it or not. He took 2 weeks. He walked along streets he had walked for 30 years and saw details he had missed in the name of making sure the floor sparkled. A dog with a right ear that didn't stand up. A tulip that had bitten the concrete and grown through it. A boy practicing a skateboard trick and failing until he didn't. Vale came each night with meals that were secretly their own world. He ate and didn't pretend he wasn't afraid. He slept. He woke. He began again. By July, the Murimer had a quiet new sign in the staff corridor: "Maintenance concerns, call this number." It was not nothing. It was also not everything. It would not bring Bernal back. It would not unclaw the hours from Ruth's palms. It would mean, maybe, that someone would fix something before it blew and took a life with it. On a Saturday when the air was thick, the Union Hall held another of those parties about not being a party. It was an anniversary of a kind they hadn't named. Archero wore his uniform because it fit, and because he had decided to love the shape of it the way you love your own face when it looks like your father's. Vale raised a plastic cup of lemonade. "To spills," she said, "and to the floors that forgive them." People clinked edges. Laughter stitched the room. Archero took Vale's hand and led her to the corner where the speaker worked best. He put her feet on his shoes and started the slow turn. She was taller now and her weight was different, and he was older and his knee sent up a small flare of pain, but the music found them and that was all that mattered. "You did the shocking thing," she said as they moved. "So did you," he said. She smiled. "I never asked. When I asked you to be my date, did you want to say no?" "Yes," he said, "for the first second. Then I looked at your face and remembered the first time you stepped on my shoes." I decided that if I wanted to be the man who picked you up when you fell on a kitchen floor, I had to be the man who stood with you on a stage. He glanced around. The hall was ordinary and gleaming. Through a window, the sun was dropping coins of light on everything it touched, like a promise that the world, for all its cruelty, might sometimes be generous by accident. "You'll get old," she said, suddenly fierce. "I have a head start," he said. "I'll get old too." "Good," he said, and held her hand in a grip that did not bruise. "We'll join a different party then. The one where everyone brings chairs from their apartments and no one cares if you burn the onions. The one where the music is a neighbor's radio and the floor is whatever you can clear." She laughed because it wasn't even a metaphor. It was exactly the kind of party they were already building. He thought of the Miramar, of mops and microphones and men who measure things with numbers until they lose the shape of a human face. He thought of the night he chose not to wear a suit because sometimes refusing a costume is a revolution. The music shifted. People changed partners. Dottie cut another slice of pie, ceremonious. Ruth told a joke that made Jose choke on his lemonade. The lights hummed, imperfect, a choir. Archero looked at his daughter. Her face was damp with sweat and happiness. He could see the girl who had learned how to map a room with newspaper squares. He could see the woman who had given back diamonds like returning a library book that never belonged to her. He felt the world tilt, not like it was falling, not like it was righting itself, but like it was daring them to keep their balance together. He decided to take the dare. "Will you be my date to the next party?" he asked. Her eyes shone. "Always," she said. "As long as you promise to be exactly who you are," he grinned. "That," he said, "is the only thing I know how to be," and it was, at last, more than enough.